Hello and welcome back to the Done Deal YouTube channel. My name's David OC and today we're reviewing the Citroen C4. Now it's a very interesting looking car, it's really comfortable to drive and it's available with a number of different engines. Most importantly, it's available as an eC4 which is fully electric. Now we'll be talking a lot more about that in this review, but prices for these start at a touch over 26,000 euros. However, that is with a petrol engine. If you want the fully electric one, it's about 34,000 euros. That said, it could be a good option. Now looking at it, the biggest, most noticeable thing is that it's very unique. So it's an SUV, but it's a coupe, and size-wise, if we're actually to look into the boot, it is currently locked, but when you open it up, it's got a 380 litre boot, which is identically sized to something like a Volkswagen Golf. So size-wise, it's almost like a Golf or a Focus, but lifted up a little bit higher, and then it's also a coupe. So very unusual, but I do quite like that. So we're gonna get talking about the design and go crack into the full review. It's not just the rear that is quite distinctive, the front is very nicely designed too. I really like these little scoops in the bonnet. The headlights, they're very unusual. You don't see them on a lot of cars, and I think the C4 has done a really good job. This one's got some gorgeous 18-inch alloys, they're diamond cut. Now, trim does make a big difference. So there's 4 different trim levels available. The first is Feel, then there's a Feel Pack, Flare, and the Flare Pack. So I think this is a Flare, and I think Flare is probably the sweet spot because you get a lot of tech with it, some driving aids, and of course the design is a lot nicer. For that, you're gonna probably need, depending on obviously what engine you go for, but around 30 to 32,000 euros. So that's probably the sweet spot. Now, if you would like to search for C4s for sale in Ireland, hit the link over there. We've got over 1,000 trusted dealerships. Now let's take a look at the inside. In the rear, well, there's not a whole lot to talk about back here. The entrance is a little bit narrow, and that's because of that rear sloping roof. And again, that does mean the headroom is ever so slightly compromised. But that said, I'm a very tall adult and I still have enough space. Knee room, it's pretty decent, very similar, maybe a little bit smaller than what you get in kind of a Golf or a Focus, but it's still okay. There's a bit of storage in there. USB charging points for the kids, and another thing for the kids is the ISOFIX points are really easily accessible. It's actually a nice tidy job with these zips, which is really good. In the front, now this actually is really nice, and in the years Citroen have very much evolved in here. So this one's push start, and when I start it up, actually that's the one thing, you do have to press it for a little bit longer than you expect. Now to start with the steering wheel, it's a really nice shape. The fabric here is actually really nice, it's a bit squishy and very comfortable in your hands. So up here there's a 5-inch display, or 5.5 inch. It has all your information, you control it using the button here and you get all your different screens. It's not as fancy as something you'll find in a Peugeot with the 3D effect, but it still has everything you need. And then up here you've got a really large 10-inch screen. Apple CarPlay, Android Auto compatible, however you do need a USB-C charging point, which I actually don't have one of them, so whilst I've had this car, I haven't been able to use it, but really that's a me problem, not a Citroen problem. The infotainment system itself, there are some shortcuts like the home button, then you can also go in and adjust the driving modes really quickly here. Driving modes also can be adjustable down here with this little button, which is very handy. Storage though is where it all comes in. So there's wireless charging there, there's a bit of storage in here, there's some cup holders down there for your drinks. In here, you'll fit your croissant, and then the glove box is a completely different ball game. So in here there is space in there for a baguette. Now I'm not gonna lie, I got a little bit hungry and had that, broke the golden rule and ate a baguette in the car. But other than that, if you notice here, a little tray slips out, and this has got an iPad holder, which is really handy because when you push that in and you push this one out, it actually clips in, and it means the passenger can watch a movie on a long drive. That is really, really intelligent, and I really do like that. And everything else in here, the seats are very, very comfortable. The driving position is completely adjustable. It's much nicer than actually something in a Peugeot. I find the driving position in a Peugeot kind of hard to find the correct spot, but in the Citroen, they've hit the nail on the head. So one other thing I do want to point out is the gear shifter here. This is an automatic one, and that leads me very well into the outside. So let's go talk about the different engine options and of course gearbox options. So there are a variety of different engines available with the C4. So when we pop up the hood, as the Americans say. This particular one has got a 1.2 litre petrol engine. It's got 130 horsepower. It's actually really economical as well. This engine is a peach, plenty of punch in it, and on one tank when I collected this it had over 700 kilometer range, which is really good. Then if you want to go for something even more economical, you can actually get a diesel version. It's a 1.5 litre, and if you get the manual version of that, it's got 110 brake horsepower. If you get the automatic version, it's got 130. There's also a 155 brake horsepower version of this as well in the petrol version. Now where it gets really interesting is actually to go with the electric side of things, but before I touch on that, I want to talk about whether you go for the manual or the automatic. So basically it's going to cost about 2,000 euros to get automatic version of the car. So essentially the same petrol engine with an automatic gearbox is about 2,000 euro more. Personally, I'd advise it. It's a really nice gearbox, but also it's going to kind of future-proof the car. There's a lot more cars. We're seeing nearly 50% of cars being sold are now automatic. So that's kind of the future. But let's talk about the electric engine. So it's got a 50 kilowatt hour battery. That's got a range of 357 kilometers. It's the same electric motor that you see across the kind of group of Citroens, Peugeots, DS, all those. And it's really good. It actually is very smooth, plenty of torque in it. So it could be one to go for. And the electric one comes in at about 35,000 euros, which is pretty decent, to be fair. I think the most you can spec it up to is about 37,000. So a lot of information to kind of incorporate and kind of comprehend there, but if you can get a grasp of it, there's a lot of options. My advice would be either electric or probably go for the 130 brake horsepower 1.2 litre petrol version with the automatic gearbox. What's the C4 like? Well, I have to say that engine is brilliant. This one's got the 1.2 litre, 130 brake horsepower, and there's a great little punch. But what's more is it's actually really economical. Now, more to the actual feeling in here when you're driving, the seat is really comfortable. The suspension's incredibly soft, and I'll go on to that later on. In terms of visibility, well, I like that your screen's here. It's not too far off the road, so when you're trying to change anything here, you're not having to look down here, which is kind of distracting. What's more is this one has a pop-up display here, and that's brilliant. It shows your speedo. It also has speed limit sign recognition. So basically what it does is if you're in a 60 km/h zone, it lets you know. So you're not wondering what the speed limit is and getting kind of unnecessary penalty points. Everything else is pretty intuitive. One thing I actually do really like is that all of the heating controls are adjusted on these manual knobs, which just means driving's a lot easier. Then when you get it out onto the motorway, obviously depending on what spec you have, there's different driving aids, but this one, for example, has adaptive cruise control, which means when the car in front of you slows down, you slow down and you speed up when it speeds up. Brilliant, particularly when you've got the automatic gearbox. Over here, it's got lane departure warning. So if you start, for whatever reason, maybe you're talking to the kids behind you, or you get distracted and you start to kind of veer out of your lane, it corrects you. Really nice, and it's not very intrusive either. Some cars it's a bit overbearing. In the C4 it's quite nice actually. And so day to day it's quite a lovely car to drive around town. It's not gigantic, as we said, in terms of width. It's not far off something like a Golf. It's not this big SUV, and that's actually another thing. You do kind of sit quite low. Obviously the seat's adjustable, but generally you're not veering over looking into people's gardens. Like, it is quite a low car. And overall it's great to drive. Personally, I actually really like the electric version. I drove it at the launch and I thought it was brilliant. The power in it's lovely, very responsive, and yeah, as a car as a whole it's really good. One negative to pick with it is, as you go through a corner, it does roll a little bit, and kind of that's a compromise with having the really soft suspension, is it will roll into corners. But that aside, it's lovely to drive. So at this point in every Done Deal review, we discuss some of our favourite and least favourite things. So let's start with the latter, and I only really have kind of two bones to pick. The first is rear visibility, because obviously it is a coupe and it's got the sloping roof, but also that rear spoiler, it means that the rear visibility isn't fantastic. The second is if you're like me, you don't like stop start. And what stop start is, when you pull up to a set of lights, the engine turns off. It's good for the environment, but it's a little bit frustrating. So every car I get in, I turn it off first thing. But in here, there's no shortcut button around here. There's no shortcut button down here. You actually have to click this button, go into your driving things, and you have to turn it off. And it's just a bit of a faff every time I get into the car. That said, there are some really nice things. Let's talk about our 3 favorite features. So first up, well, this isn't it, but I do want to acknowledge real exhaust down the bottom. But one of my favorite features is that in here, and I wonder if it's the same in the electric version, I'm not sure. But in this one, there is a real spare wheel. Big fan of that. Number 2 is when you put it into reverse, the reversing cameras are insane. So as I get closer, it beeps with the parking sensors. And as I get really close, you'll see now, it actually goes to a bird's eye view so I can see how close I am. And then, when you get it, it stops itself, so it won't let you hit into a wall or a bush or whatever's behind you. That is so cool. And number 3 is that, you heard earlier on me talking about how comfortable the suspension is, and I've driven the electric version, it's even better because it's a little bit heavier. But the reason is, it's got something called progressive hydraulic suspension cushioning. I think that's the exact phrase. And what it basically means is, at the top of the spring and the shock, instead of having a metal solid mount, there's a little bit of a cushion there, which just means the whole ride is a little bit smoother. It makes a big difference, and actually the ride quality is phenomenal on this. Now, that is kind of a summary of the Citroen C4. It is fantastic to drive. It's really smooth. There's an endless amount of engine options, whether you go for something petrol, if you do want a diesel, or personally I think it might be worth going down to your local dealer and actually trying the electric version, because if you're doing a little bit of town driving, it's a good option. Nonetheless, we hope you've enjoyed this review. If you have, please make sure to subscribe, follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook and Twitter, and of course, if you'd like to search for any cars for sale in Ireland, we've got over 1,000 trusted dealerships, so hit the link up there. They'll be sure to get you into your new car securely. There's financing options that they can do for you. There's plenty of options. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. That's all from me, and we'll see you in the next one.